There's a modern-day mystery school? What? Welcome to the Joyous Expansion Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Dupree, scouring the globe to bring you stories of courage, passion, and resilience. If I could sum up this podcast into one word, I would use empathy. Now let's get inspired. Welcome to the Joyous Expansion Podcast. I am your host once again, Brett Dupree, here to drop the spiritual knowledge on you. This is episode 86? I really got to start looking at what episode... Yes, 86. I really got to start looking at it. I do not prepare at all because I like free form. I'm a jazz podcaster. I just want this to be off the top of my head, from the heart. Be-bop-a-dee-da, oh-wah-da, scatting. So that's why I always forget which number it is. Now that you know a little backstory, here's the beginning of my podcast where I'm vulnerable about what's going on in my life. Because how can I expect my guests to be vulnerable if I can't be vulnerable myself? So basically, it's 9/25/2020, still in the midst of the global pandemic. I am kind of struggling. I really need to get a therapist. I've been putting it off. I found someone to call. But yeah, I need one. I need someone to talk to about life and things that could be a sounding board and do therapist type things. Because it's really hard to concentrate on work and stuff. And I have job anxiety anyway on my my job as a software tester because I got laid off in 2015 and it was really hard for me to find a job, and that just crushed me because I was doing so well and just felt really comfortable for the first time in my life and just had that ripped away from me. And yeah, and I don't feel like, it's 5 years later. I think that was actually a trauma event. And that was kind of probably didn't still get over my uncle's death in 2012 with that and stuff. Anyway, that's just a guess, but I don't really want to talk about that part. I'm not going to talk too much because this is another longer interview. This one's really cool because it's somebody I know personally, Osiris Indriya. I hear him pronounce his last name, but I can never think about how to pronounce it. He is the leader of a local chapter of this thing called the Modern Day Mystery School, which is something that I am an initiate in. It was really fun telling my family that, hey, I joined a cult this weekend when they asked me what I did. And yeah, but my story of going in there is because I am one of those weird people who believe in synchronicities in a sense. If I hear something 3 times, I generally look more into it. And for some reason during this time, I just felt drawn to Egyptian stuff. Just this Egyptian stuff started popping out to me, Egyptian folklore, Egyptian mythology. And I really got into learning about Thoth, or Toth, however you say his name, in the Emerald Tablets, and reaching that. And then I got into, I forgot her name, but the person who read Sekhmet, and I actually went through the entire book, did the visualizations of being devoured by Sekhmet. I actually listened to her live. See, that's the weird thing. I went to this Center for Spiritual Living in Seattle, and I went to the bookstore. Because I think I was just trying to find a group because I was still feeling bad about my life. I was feeling so much anxiety, and I was looking for something, and I know group meditation is something that helps me a lot. And so I wanted to see if the Center for Spiritual Living, a kind of non-Christian, but still feels Christian to me school, because man, do they mention God a lot. I think they mention Jesus sometimes. I don't really notice a difference between them and non-churchy stuff, but then again, or churchy stuff, but I don't go to a lot of church type things. For some reason, I do not like church. I went to a wedding that was at a church service, and it was like an hour and a half, and I was just not comfortable. Every time I've gone to a church service, even unity churches, I just don't like church. There's just something about it that rubs me the wrong way. I don't know what it is. So the Center for Spiritual Living I tried. I went like 3 or 4 times. I just never felt welcome. I just never felt this was my tribe. This is the people I'm supposed to be with. Anyway, so I'm going through the bookstore, and all of a sudden, bam, I see this author. I see Thoth, and I see this author. I found this podcast randomly, and it was with that author. And then, bam, she was at the East West bookstore. So I saw something else, Egyptian. And so I was scrolling through Facebook, as I am an addict of Facebook, and one of my friends is interested in an event, and the event was an Egyptian meditation, which I thought was super cool, because honestly, you don't see very many Egyptian mythology meditations. In fact, you generally see none. Everything generally has a Christian slant to it, even if it's not Christian, even if it's either Christian or pagan. What I mean by Christian, it's kind of new agey Christian, where they call up the angels, Archangel Michael and all the angels, but they say they're not Christian, but still has that Christian iconography of angels, demons, and whatnot, and souls that go to a heaven and a hell type idea, even though they don't really believe in that, but they kind of, they change it to the universe or whatever, but still kind of has that Christian feel. Or they go through more pagan type, sometimes not really Norse mythology. Of course, I'm in the Pacific Northwest, so decent amount of them also have the culturally appropriation of the local Indian mythology. Yes, I've been to drum circles. And of that, so, local shamans who do like coyote meditations and stuff like that. So, of course, I'm part of the Pacific Northwest, so yes, I've been to those. I love the cacao ceremonies, which I mentioned briefly many times, and that takes a little bit of everything, but Egyptian. So I went, and I very much enjoyed the people there. They were all so nice and friendly, and I'm sure I've never been to an actual culty cult where they want you to live in their compound and give away all your things. This isn't that kind of. I think anything that has a spiritual thing that's not. I think Christianity is cult, to be honest. It's just a more popular cult. I believe in the joke, what's the difference between a religion and a cult? One has a leader who is very charismatic that everyone follows, and in a religion, that person's dead. Just meeting the people, and everyone's so nice, and I really enjoy the meditation, because I love group meditations. That's one thing I do miss in this COVID world, and I really need them. I look forward to being within a group again and doing them, and I really need to get on leading my own. This is way longer than I thought it would be. So anyway, what I'm saying is I went to one, I really liked the people, and I started going. I went for like 3 years, even after they kind of stopped doing the Egyptian parts and started doing Wicca ones. And I went to the Wicca ones. I went to the ones I can, because number one, I love group meditations. I've gotten to know the people there, and the people there were amazing. Listening to the stories, seeing the people's transformations in it has been really cool. I've seen people who just change so much and grow. Even if I did become an initiate, but I didn't really follow the path myself, I have gained a lot from going and meeting everybody. And I think at least in the Seattle area, the modern day mystery school people are great. And that's one reason why I asked Osiris Indriya. I'm not going to say his last name. That's one reason I asked Osiris on my podcast, because he seems like such a great and genuine person. And I truly love him, and he's a great person. And I always enjoyed my conversations with him. So I am very excited for this interview. So I'll read my introduction now. Osiris is an initiate and certified spiritual guide and ritual master of a true ancient lineage of light through the modern-day mystery school. His passion is serving others on their personal path of empowerment and fostering community with a focus on service to humanity. Osiris is also a creative visionary, producer, entrepreneur, artist, designer, musician, consultant, community leader, husband, and father. This kid is super cute, by the way. Osiris is regularly invited to share his wisdom at spiritual events and conferences. He is also producer of original music and a professional DJ, performing at clubs, festivals, and events on the West Coast and beyond. And now here is my interview with Osiris Indriya. Hello, Osiris, and welcome to my podcast.
Thank you.
It's so cool to have you on. Give the audience a little bit of who you are.
Yeah, my name's Osiris Indriya. I'm a lot of things. I'm a dad of a 4.5-year-old, which definitely has been occupying quite a bit of my life and energy as of late. I also spend my life loving and empowering people, helping build really smart and effective businesses, producing art and music. I do a lot of things, so that makes me relatively complicated and hard to explain sometimes. It just kind of depends what the moment needs. I do my best to bring the best of me to that moment.
Oh, that's awesome. How was Osiris growing up?
Generally speaking, I was a pretty intense kid. I learned really early that I was very good at manipulation through tantrums, through all manner of behavioral issues. I would generally get my way. And when I figured out how good I was at getting my way through essentially torturing others, I kind of made a choice pretty young that I didn't want to do that. I felt bad about coercing people through bad behavior to do what I wanted them to do. So I made a conscious choice that I wanted to try to collaborate with people more and find mutually beneficial outcomes, which is definitely kind of an odd thing for a young child to do. I asked my mother about it many years later, and she said, yeah, she realized early on that I would rather die than do what they wanted me to do. And she really felt that deep in her bones, which is kind of an intense thing for a mother to realize. But then she did notice at some point, in the first 5 years of life, I turned a corner and made a change. And she thought that it was her schooling and education. She was going to school for social work. She was learning a lot about people, that maybe she had done something, and maybe she did. It may have been some things she communicated to me, but for whatever reason, I realized I didn't want to create suffering in people. Instead, I wanted to create positive outcomes.
I guess past 5 years old, how was creating positive outcomes showing up through your life?
Didn't really have a direction for that. So at first it was just limit that negative behavior that I was using to manipulate people, number one. And then my family was a very Catholic family. My mother went to church multiple times a week, not just Sundays. I would go every Sunday with my family. And one time at church when I was about 6 years old, just a little bit later than this internal decision, I was sitting in church while the priest was giving his sermon about something I didn't really understand. I was super bored. I remember the kind of polyester velvet fabric of the pews was a little bit rough and scratchy, and I was laying on the pew drawing on the donation envelopes with the little stubby pencils they had there, just bored out of my mind. Like, how long was this going to go on? And all of a sudden, I just had this really intense rush and feeling, and an epiphany came to me. I remember it being like audio, that I heard a voice speaking. I have no idea what voice it was. What I remember hearing was that I would reach a level of mastery in this lifetime, and that my mission was to help as many other people accomplish that same thing with me. And then I saw this beautiful vision of a whole bunch of people walking shoulder to shoulder with me, and that we were all accomplishing some major purpose in this really crucial time on the earth. I immediately got up and told my mother what I was experiencing in the moment, because that's a natural thing to do. Some big moment happens, and, she shushed me and told me to be quiet and said she would talk to me later, because we were in the middle of church and the priest was still talking. We did talk about it later, and she thought it was interesting. I mean, it's a pretty amazing thing for a 6-year-old to try to tell you about. She definitely supported it, but didn't really understand or didn't necessarily feel like she had a specific role to play in that. She just wanted to see what it would unfold as. That essentially kind of calibrated my internal beacon on focusing on this life purpose and mission very young. I basically spent the next several years assuming that I was going to become a Catholic priest, because I was raised Catholic, and if you wanted to have a big impact on people, I couldn't think of a better example of leadership than the priest. I started going much deeper into the Catholic faith. I went to extra youth groups that were a little bit cultish, I'll admit, that they were a little bit extreme, but they were still Catholic. I started seeing all of the aspects of that faith that led people to feelings of guilt, shame. There's a lot of limiting beliefs that were imposed on people through that, this separation between people and the divine, which didn't make sense to me, because in my vision, it was the opposite going on. I was going to achieve this amazing direct connection with the divine, with purpose, with everything. And how could I do that while I was simultaneously involving myself in things that were reinforcing this idea of separation, that somehow I'm lesser, that I have this original sin, and that there's all of these things that must be done to maintain life, to avoid hell. All of these things were very separating and felt like fragmentation, when I was trying to be whole and bring lots of other people into wholeness along with me. Eventually, I started going to the priest. So this is now like early teens, like 12 to 14. I started going to the priest for confession, as often as possible. But what I would do is I would confess a few things, and then I would start pounding the priest with questions about accomplishing this mission I had. And this amazing priest, Father Mike, eventually, by the time I was 14, and it had been a few years of this, finally came to me and said, you know what, I'm curious if this route of becoming a priest, of living a life of focus in the Catholic faith, was actually going to get me to where I wanted to go. He said that what I was talking about was really beautiful, but he wasn't sure that the Roman Catholic Church was where I was going to find what I was looking for, which is insane. It's crazy to know and to think of a priest, an example of this very long-standing institution, to tell me maybe I needed to look outside of this. I'm so grateful for this man, but my initial response to that was deep depression, because that was all I knew. I had no access to other things. I had no way of discovering this for myself. I was still 14. I maybe had a learner's permit, but I had no way to go anywhere. I lived too far away from bookstores or things. This is the early 90s, and internet wasn't really a thing yet in any significant way. So I just didn't have access. So I spent a lot of time very depressed. I actually stopped eating and stopped caring for my body because I didn't understand how I could live a life without my purpose. I suddenly felt this crisis, that purpose that I knew was me, felt so right and real, was out of reach now. And if I couldn't accomplish that, then I didn't know why I was here. And I didn't hate myself. I didn't have any suicidal thoughts that I wanted to harm myself, but I just couldn't invest in living. So I essentially fasted. I didn't really mean to. I had no reason to invest in life. And after a few days of this, obviously my parents were concerned. I talked my mother into taking me to a bookstore and just dropping me off there for a while, which she did. I went to the religion and spirit studies area in the nonfiction and just started looking at books. I gravitated to two books. One was a book on Taoism, and one was a book on Zen Buddhism. Can't exactly figure out why I made that choice. I gravitated to those books, and they were really a perfect place to start, because Taoism is a very simplistic view, a very internal view of spirit, of connection through a different kind of right living. But it had rules and guidelines, but it wasn't nearly as complex and difficult as what I found in the Catholic Church. It was so foreign and different. And then the Zen Buddhism book was almost like a comic book that showed all these stories of enlightenment and how Buddha was enlightened and how a succession of Buddhist masters would enlighten each other and how each person had a unique enlightenment story. That really caught my attention. Oh, that we all have our own way of reaching this. So I realized I needed to find my way. Then I spent the next several years going deep into religious studies, studying every kind of spiritual path and opportunity that I could get my hands on. And of course, books only got me so far. And the thing that I started getting really excited about were the earth-based religions, shamanism, and magic, and Hermetic philosophy. And I was specifically into some of the Wiccan books. As I was talking to friends, now I'm in high school, a girl I was interested in dating at the time told me she was in a small Wiccan coven and practiced witchcraft. I was all in. I wanted to experience that. I wanted to understand something very different from what I was raised. And so I joined that coven as kind of a guest member. I was never officially included, but they allowed me to participate quite a bit, did a lot of learning. And I really loved how each of us got to stand at our own altar to the divine instead of having someone else like a priest do that for us, to be that bridge, that I could create my own bridge direct to divinity. And of course, the concept of a feminine divine as well as a masculine divine really helped me to bring more of that internal unity of my masculine and feminine. And I knew that this was an important piece. So that's sort of the young life growing up in the family. And I'm just super grateful that my parents, and especially my mother, was super supportive, and keeping in mind at the same time she was going to school for social work at a Catholic university. They didn't ever stop their focus on faith, but she really encouraged my exploration, and I'm just super grateful to have the family I have.
Yeah, that's something that is rare from what I understand how Catholics generally treat their youths that go wayward, I guess.
Yeah.
Or at least a stereotype.
Definitely.
Basically, after that, what got you out of your depression and your next steps towards where you're going?
This Wiccan group gave me hope. I was like, oh, there's other things out there. There's other people doing things that are not just Christian. It just was so hard to get outside of that world. And now that I knew and I tasted it, I decided I wanted to just keep going. As I went to college, I moved into the city to Seattle. I started college at Cornish College of the Arts, working toward a degree in music. I got a job at an amazing music and record store on Capitol Hill in Seattle called Orpheum Records during the early to mid-90s, when the rave scene was just starting to take off. I wasn't old enough to go into nightclubs, but raves were definitely something I had access to. And I started learning about electronic music and went and saw some dance parties and felt the experience of being on a dance floor with loud, thumping music, with beautiful sounds I'd never heard before, produced with synthesizers, and just really felt moved by it and moved by that communal dance experience, and thought, wow, this must be part of how I accomplish my mission, is bringing people together in joy and expression. So I decided to learn how to produce electronic music and became a DJ mostly to learn how to produce the music. And through that, I actually started producing the events. That was sort of the next big phase of my life, was becoming an electronic music event producer. I stopped calling them raves because I wanted to create something that was more explicitly spiritually focused without focusing on any specific tradition. So we called it spiritual dance communities, tribal dance communities, because we were reaching into that older way of being in community together. Maybe it was a little bit of an appropriation of that word tribal, but it really felt like we were pulling out some deeper roots of our humanity. And we actually started aligning with various spiritual groups, local native tribes from the Pacific Northwest, to really make sure what we were educating ourselves, and then in turn sharing that education at our events with participants. And eventually a group of us created something called the Oracle Gatherings, which were a series of 23 events that went from about 2001 to 2008, where each event was celebrating a theme from a tarot deck that we made. So we made our own 23-card tarot deck, a divination deck of cards with images on them depicting various scenes. And we would draw a card at the end of the previous event to determine what the next event was. So the events themselves were a reading. At each event, we celebrated that theme. So the first one was called Father-Son. We had the myth, the elements, alchemy, the senses, lots of great themes. And each theme had a performance that happened at midnight that we called a prayer-formance, which was an actual rite of passage ceremony we invented for the participants to go through based on the theme. So our goal was creating real experiences, real magic as we understood it, as performance for a whole community to go through these cathartic transformations together over this period of time. And it was amazing what we were doing. I'd never heard or seen anything like it. And yet it still wasn't quite what I had felt from my initial vision. So I was still looking. And eventually we had a card come up called Mystery School. And in my mind, this concept of mystery school was really interesting, but I felt like mystery schools were an ancient thing that didn't exist anymore, that, there were remnants of these things, but they weren't really relevant anymore today, but it was still worth celebrating. And we had a hard time finding a venue for this event. We ended up teaming up. So we were kind of a group of hippie ravers that were very spiritual, playing very upbeat, happy music. And we partnered with a group of industrial Gothic folks who had their own music labels and bands. And we partnered up and we went to a nudist park in the Pacific Northwest to throw a festival together. And we called the event Mystery School, and they called their event the Black Sun. And we were at the same venue, and they were deep in the woods, and we were out on the lawn in the sun at a nudist park. It's such an amazing, intense experience to see these really opposing aesthetics come together. And we had a stage in the middle where all the food was, which was a way of blending the two communities, where we booked artists back and forth, one after the other, where there was music from both communities in one space where people ate. And there was a lake where the only place in the whole park where you had to be naked, according to the rules of the park, was the lake.
Oh, weird.
So come as you are everywhere else, but at the lake, you must be nude. And in the saunas, of course. By Sunday of this weekend festival called Mystery School, all of the hippie ravers and goths were all nude at the lake, and the only way you could tell the difference was the paleness of the skin and a little bit of the hair, maybe. It was an amazing coming together of opposites, so we thought, which is what we thought mystery schools were about. But at this event, somebody from a real mystery school saw the flyer and said, "Mystery school, what is this?" and came to the nudist park and had never really been to a rave before. And she checked it out. She thought that was pretty cool. She'd never seen anything like this. She was initiate of the Modern Mystery School, and she tried to find out who was in charge of this event. She met with us and started speaking with us, and specifically had a lot of conversations with me. She spent a lot of her free time coming over to tell me about her school, her tradition, answered like a zillion questions, because by this point I'd tried everything from my perspective. I'm still in my 20s, of course. I knew it all. I was invincible. I had learned all about all the religions and traditions. There was nothing she had to offer me. I'd also followed gurus and tried things where it always turned out that the gurus were somehow imperfect, or they were just out to take my money or wanted something improper from me. I'd experienced it all. So I assumed this was just another one of those things that wanted to take my resources and energy. But there was something about this woman that was a little bit different. So eventually I decided that I needed to at least give it a try. It's not every day someone from a 3,000-year-old tradition, so she said, comes into your life and invites you to learn about it one-on-one. I decided to give it a shot. So she did something with me called the life activation, which is a session, a one-on-one session with some ritual and some work with a wand that has a crystal made out of sage. And I went, had that experience. It was cool. It was interesting, but I didn't feel like anything happened. So I went home. And a couple of weeks later, she calls me up and said, how's it going since your activation? And I said, nothing really happened. I didn't feel anything. So I think I'm done. I appreciate your time. She said, well, why don't you just tell me about your life? Like, what's happened since I saw you? So I started talking, and said, well, I moved into a new house, and starting some new professional relationships that are actually starting to produce some pretty amazing opportunities. And my relationships have pretty much transformed, like all of them. I got all of this new work, and even my pets are behaving better. She goes, oh, so nothing's happened. I literally had to have her confront me about that for me to realize how drastically everything had changed. And the reason I didn't attribute it to the session was because these were all things I had wanted and worked towards for years. And yet, within 2 weeks, all of them happened. And that made me go, maybe there's something to this. So I made a decision in that moment that I was going to go for it. I was going to go deep into this tradition, that I wanted to meet whoever was in charge, because I knew this woman learned from somebody. So I wanted to find who she learned from, who that person learned from, who that person learned from, until I got to the source, so I could figure out how that person was flawed and then move on with my life. Because everything else had always been that way. So I did that. Within about 6 months, I was in Utah meeting the founder of this tradition. And in some ways, I could say the rest is history, that every human is flawed to some degree. But this community was literally my vision. It was an international organization of people coming together to reveal and express their unique purpose, using exceptional tools that were working for people from all over the world with different languages, histories, different political beliefs, different socioeconomic statuses, like everything all coming together the same tools working for everybody, everyone working towards that empowerment of self and the fulfillment of purpose. And I was like, this is it. This is literally what I've been trying to create. And what a load off that was to feel like, wow, I don't have to invent this. In fact, I can stand on the shoulders of all these other people and build my own reality with it. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
So with the modern day mystery school, what reality did you end up building?
Well, I became more myself. I really got into, there's many different aspects to this ancient Hermetic tradition. It comes from, according to the tradition, direct from what we know of as the god Hermes. In the tradition is called Hermes Trismegistus or Trismegistus, which is the thrice great Hermes, which the tradition says was an actual being who taught one person, and that one person wrote everything down and passed it along so others could learn it. And this philosophy is over 3,000 years old, at least the tradition, because the tradition was solidified by King Solomon the Wise 3,000 years ago. Hermes was many thousands of years before that. But the actual format of this tradition was solidified by King Solomon the Wise. And all of the tools are just there to enhance who you already are. So just like my life activation experience, where all the things I've been working for were suddenly within reach, these tools were designed to help people bring that life they desire within reach and to help clarify our desire to make sure that what we're aimed at is true to our central purpose, to who we really are, not based on what other people have told us we should be doing. So clearing away all those external world influences that honestly don't really matter and aren't relevant to who we are as a being, so we can be who we really are. And honestly, as much as that can be a little confrontive for people at first, as people were watching me shift, there were definitely people who were concerned, thinking I was getting involved in some weird cult and potentially throwing my life and money away. The truth is I was just becoming more me. And within that 6 months of aggressive learning and practice of ritual meditation, I was able to come back out and rebuild all of my relationships, where that child me who was manipulating people, even though I told myself I didn't want to do it, I was still doing it. And the way I was manipulating people was I was manipulating my relationships to need me. I found ways to make myself essential in other people's life, so that way I knew they would always be there, that they needed me to be around. And what Mystery School taught me how to do was be completely self-sufficient and to know that I could do everything for myself, that there's nothing outside of me that I needed to be complete. As a complete person, I can have much more deep and meaningful relationships with others. So I recreated all of my relationships as a complete person where I didn't need to be needed, that I could participate with people where sometimes I would be in support of their visions, but I also knew sometimes it was my turn to be supported and to have people support my visions, but also knowing that I had everything I need to do it on my own, if that's what it took to get my mission done.
Awesome. So talk a little bit about your, I believe it's Blessed Tara Center?
Yes. My wife and I live in Bothell, Washington, and we have our home and center. So we've essentially dedicated about 50%, a whole floor of our home to work, the upper floor to living, where we live with our 4-year-old son. And we've also now added an outdoor space because we do live in the era of coronavirus pandemic. And in order to continue doing our work, we want to make sure we're being as safe as possible. So we now have an outdoor session space under a canopy, which we're really excited about for the summer months. But we have a center where we offer personal sessions, healings, like the life activation I spoke about, initiations into the tradition, oral handing downs, we call it, or the process of sharing knowledge and tools and rituals that come from this ancient tradition, which our tradition only works in person. So this world of Zoom and podcasts, there's only so much we can share. In order to help people, we need to be in the same physical space with them. So we've set up our home, 50% of our home, to be a temple and learning space. In addition to that, I started a religious nonprofit called the Institute of Awakened Mastery, and we have a space in the Northgate area in Seattle, which hopefully will be reopening with limited capacity to also continue this important work of empowering people.
So what does it look like working with you?
We always start with a consultation, with a conversation, because I wish I could quote someone right now. I heard this week, and I can't remember where I heard it. If it comes to me, I'll speak up. The idea that the world is upside down, and all of us are oriented to that upside down world, or maybe a better way of saying it is inside out or outside in, where the outside literally gets in and contaminates who we are. And the orientation of moving yourself to be an inside out orientation, where that unique light that is you is coming out into the world instead of us responding to what's coming in, is a really different reality for a lot of people. Because we've been so ingrained in focusing outside of us, the external world, for all of our validation, for our sense of self. This idea I heard this week is someone said that you should smile because your mood is determined by your environment, and your smile will help you feel happy inside. And I got so upset because that's a person being a victim to the outside world. And that's not who and what we are. We're divine beings. We have an infinite source of possibility and potential within. And we have the ability to influence not only our mood from the inside out, but all others. So that initial consultation is really about feeling out and meeting people where they are, hearing them out, understanding what they believe their story is, where they want to go in life, and then also representing to them the way my wife and I have been living, that inside out reality, that the inside comes out, and seeing if people find resonance with that. Because not everyone's ready to make that shift. Because even though it seems kind of simple and basic, it's really hard to do when we're so habitually focused on bringing the outside in. So that consultation is essential to make sure there's compatibility around moving that focus to be internal, and then learning to express who we really are. And if people do find affinity to that, then we invite them to either take classes in small groups, do sessions like the life activation, potentially receive initiation. And once one is initiated into the tradition, they then get access to do everything that we're doing, which is to continue on in this larger international school and be trained by many teachers. So we're just kind of an access point to the tradition. So we don't really see people as like our students per se, but we have some tools to help people get started, and then we can introduce them to all of the many pathways that were available to us so they can find what's best for them to help their lives and their purpose. So just like in our original, or my original vision, I can help build that army of people walking shoulder to shoulder with me, changing the world for the better, helping people wake up to who they really are and living a life of purpose.
So what kind of transformations have you seen from people that you've worked with and initiated?
It's interesting because I would actually say about 75% of the people we see have significant transformations. They tell us they're grateful. One of the obvious changes for a lot of people tends to be financial, which comes with bringing yourself more in line with your true purpose. And making your work, your life work, tends to help people become a bit more abundant. And it may not be financially right away, but there's a different type of opportunity that opens up when you're more authentic to who you really are. For some people, it's just a different sense of peace and well-being. It can be physical healing. It really varies because it kind of depends on what people are working through when they come to us. But in some of the extreme cases, we've had people we didn't know at the time who were actually extremely depressed and considering suicide. They came to us as a last resort because honestly, what we're doing is a little bit weird. To go to someone who says they're part of a mystery school, to receive energy healings that you've never heard of before, and to learn classes about things that are hard to substantiate, like learning about unseen forces, angelic beings, rituals. It's definitely out there. It's outside of what most people consider normal. And so often people come to us as a last resort. They've tried all of the standard things first. They've gone to psychotherapists, they've gone to nutritionists, and they got them part of the way, but there was always something in the way they couldn't get beyond. And so we've helped those people to get out of that depressed state and start thriving. So I say 75% of these people they'll thank us, and then they'll go on to live their lives. And we may not hear from them much again, but often they'll get what they need in a few visits, change enough of their life, as much as they're looking for, and then they go about their life. And that's great. About 25% do end up pursuing the deeper mysteries with us and go on that process of becoming peers with us in the tradition. Because it's not for everybody. Not everyone's purpose is to share mystery school teachings, right?
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. But those are some cool transformations as well. So we are coming to the end of our time together, and one thing I like to ask my guests is to give a 1 minute of motivation. You can imagine this as if you're in a time machine traveling back to your 8-year-old self, and you want to convey everything you need to live a happy, joy-filled life, but unfortunately you only have a minute until you're plucked back into the future. Or you can think of it as taking your entire life's message and condensing it down to a minute.
The first thing to know about yourself is that you belong here, that you have purpose and reason for being, a unique and special purpose that has never been expressed in this physical reality ever before. And that light is important to shine bright, to help everyone to realize who they are and bring about the peace that we want to see in the world. That opportunity for each of us to be celebrated in our uniqueness and thrive. We are often challenged by the external world. The external world attempts to put limits on us, to get us questioning what we feel inside. And those are all just tests of our resilience and challenges for us to learn, to reflect, to center ourselves, build ourselves up so that we can shine brighter than any of the darkness that may come our way. And as we shine brighter, instead of seeing darkness in the world, we attract a lot more light. It's extremely important to know and see our own value, even if it's not something that we've yet experienced, to at least hold the hope that we can find it, and that the only place we can find it is within. And once we've found it, it's our mission and purpose to share that uniqueness with the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on my podcast. I was really interested in listening to your story on how you started and wanting to become a Catholic priest. And luckily you had such a supportive foundation to push you to seek out other avenues and to be able to build on that and becoming a DJ and bringing people together. But even then, still going beyond that into finding something that fits you and your vision so that you can help and serve other people is extremely fascinating. And I thank you so much for sharing it on my podcast. So thank you so much for everything you do for this world. And thank you for being on my podcast.
Thank you, Brett. I really appreciate you and everything that you're doing and love watching you thrive and grow through this podcast. So thank you so much for including me in your life and in this project.
May your day be special.
Yours as well.
And there you have it, folks. That is my interview with Osiris. He had a very interesting life. I enjoyed how he had a vision, and then through the avenues of life, he was able to find something to allow him to live his vision and to empower people and make this world a better place. As I said in front, as I've known Osiris for about 3 years now, I've always felt he was a genuine and caring person, someone who practiced what he preaches and has a certain level of authenticity that I don't feel like you find with a lot of people. So far, in everything I've talked to him and heard about him, is what you see is what you get. You know, sometimes you meet somebody and then you just learn things through grapevines and stuff and people talk. But I haven't heard anything like that through Osiris. My dealings with him has shown him to be just a loving and caring person. And that I am proud to be able, he's just someone, you know somebody and you like the fact that you know them and you can have conversations with them and stuff like that. Hung out a couple times to just talk, and it was fun to have him on my podcast to share his story and to learn more about him. One of the few podcasts where I can give a personal recommendation is I have worked through him and the Modern Day Mystery School. I was an initiate. I got a life activation. I don't know if my life has completely changed. I did life activation at a time when I felt at my lowest. I couldn't even pay for the life activation. One of the people were nice enough to allow me to pay in installments because I was on unemployment, and my unemployment was kind of running out, I believe. I just needed something at that time to make me feel better in any way. It was a dark time in my life. When I think about that time and I notice how much decompressing I have done in the last 3 years of employment and how that really affected me. Unemployment is a traumatic experience, especially when you reach the point of hopelessness, of finding a job, and the perspective of homelessness. I've just never experienced that, and I'm truly understanding that more, how that trauma exists, and going through the group meditations, the life activations, through Modern Day Mystery School, and even going through the initiation was some things that helped me through that entire time. Pretty much a lot of the time, about at least a year of going to those events, I was at my lowest of my life. Really, or one of my lowest points. I was still high. I don't know. It's hard to tell because I was still happier as a person than I was before I went through my transformation, but it was hard, and I'm recognizing how hard it was, and that did help me, and the group and the community and the love that they showed me helped me through that, and I can say that without a doubt, that they are great, genuine people, and the ones that I did connect with are people who I truly believe that they believe in what they're doing, and what they're doing truly helps people. And I appreciate people like that in my life. I did the rituals that I learned for about 3 months, and then my roommate moved out, and the feeling of re-anxiety of just losing all my finances at that point caused me to just stop doing them. But I can say that after that point, I did get a job that has been great to me and has paid me more than I've ever been paid. And also I have my fiance, who I would never have met if it wasn't for the Modern Day Mystery School, as I met her at one of the group meditations, and she's great and I love her very much, and I'm very thankful for it. So I can say without a doubt that the Modern Day Mystery School did improve my life. So if you want to get in touch with Osiris and see the plethora of life activations or type of activations and get a consultation, you can check them out at Blessed Tara Center. The website is BLESSOTERRA.center, and you can activate your hidden potential and book your life activation and all the other great things that he does. Again, I give a personal recommendation to Osiris, as he's been a great friend to me, and I truly appreciate him. So I would highly recommend checking him out. And there it is, folks. That is episode 86 of the Joyous Expansion podcast. Jeez, so many numbers, so many. So if you like this, like, subscribe, share, leave a review. I appreciate you forever and love you. Anyway, you know I love you for just listening to this part, because that means you listen to my entire podcast and you're amazing. So if you want to email me for any reason, email me at BRE2Ts2PR2Es at joyousexpansion.com. You can check me out at joyousexpansion.com. Also, you can listen to more podcasts at pod.joyousexpansion.com. You can find me at Joyous Expansion at Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. But unfortunately, Facebook, I'm in Increase Your Joy because my SEO game is terrible. Once again, I thank you so much for listening and being who you are. I'm Brett Dupree, your champion of authentic joy, Joyous Expansion life coach, and catalyst of transformation for the Church of Awesome, reminding you once again to be love, to be joy, to be awesome. And now play that jingle.
JoyousExpansion.com JoyousExpansion.com Come and say hello to Brett Dupree. He is an inspirational life coach, good for you and good for me. He turned my life from grey to blue, I'm sure he'll do the same for you. Get in touch and you'll see your life will change dramatically. JoyousExpansion.com JoyousExpansion.com